Every gambler knows that the secret to surviving,
I don't wanna take advice from fools.
you always won every time you placed a bet.
Money, that's what I want.
I'm Joe Duffy, CEO of OffshoreInsiders.com. On this video, we are going to discuss the biggest myths in sports betting. They're mistakes that chances are you make, but the sharp player never does. Now let's go to myth number one. Won-loss records are the most important statistic, or at the very least, one of the most important statistics in sports handicapping. False. In fact, it is the single most overrated statistic in sports handicapping. Remember, when we're talking about against the spread, we're talking about the margin of victory or margin for loss. In fact, the best gamblers out there are the ones that use my dichotomous spread theory, as I call it, and that is teams that will win straight up but consistently fail to cover, or betting on teams that often lose straight up but do cover the spread. And in football, for example, one of the best ways that we are able to isolate which teams are going to be overvalued and undervalued, we assign a quote-unquote victory to a team that wins the total yards battle in that contest, and then compare it to the straight-up record. For example, if a team gets 300 yards and they give up 275, that is a win. They may lose the game outright. So the fifth game into the season, if a team is 5-0 as far as winning the yardage battle, but only 2-3 straight up, chances are they're an undervalued team. Meanwhile, a squad that has a much better straight up record than they have the total yards record is going to be the overvalued team. And likewise, we will use yards per game margin in the same way that a lot of handicappers will use points per game margin, although points per game is obviously very important. But believe me, there is not one more overrated statistic in sports handicapping than the deceptive won-loss records, because it's all about the margin of victory. Of course, one that we've discussed in a lot of other videos, as well as articles before, quote-unquote, just pick the team that wins outright and chances are you will have the spread winner. As we've said, that's a perfect case of inductive reasoning rather than deductive reasoning, rather than a complete myth. If a team is a 3-point favorite, there is one and only one way a team can win outright without covering. The favorite would have to cover, and they would have to win by just 1 or 2 points. Any other scenario, of course, the team that wins outright is going to cover. The problem is, with that inductive reasoning, it makes more of the squares pick favorites again and again, figuring, well, this team has a chance to win outright, so they're going to be the ones to cover. That is a big myth, mostly because of the inductive reasoning. And, of course, another one of those huge myths. Bet on the better defensive squad. Especially when it comes to the postseason, the better offenses win. But you can't necessarily look at the mere statistics. In some cases, functionally, that's not totally a myth, because the better defensive teams statistically are usually ones with the more efficient offenses. And that is especially true in basketball and football handicapping. But a lot of people will look at mere points per game statistics and assume that that's going to be the better team to bet on, the better defensively. Now, in basketball, we use Ken Pom uses those points per possession statistics, and in the NBA, there's a guy at ESPN Inside Basketball. I can't even remember the guy's name offhand, but he also has a similar statistics, the points per 100 possessions. That's pretty good because it also measures a team's efficiency. Another betting myth. A lot of squares think, simply wager on the team that needs to win the most. Absolutely, positively false. Remember, at the end of the year, teams that are in must-win games are clearly haven't been very efficient in winning must-win games, or else they wouldn't be in those must-win games. The better way, and in fact, it's kind of the anti-square move, we actually bet on teams that are in true spoiler situations against teams in must-win situations. Now, must-win doesn't mean literally they have to win or they're out of the playoffs, but it means that a team that has almost no margin of error as far as making the playoffs, we're not talking about positioning, playoff positioning or winning the top spot, not even so much a bye in the NFL, but a team that truly needs to win to make the playoffs, that they have very little margin of victory, and an also-ran would be a team that has almost no chance at making the playoffs, realistic chance. Like maybe they're 8 games out with 10 games remaining. Mathematically, they haven't been eliminated, but they have no realistic chance to make the playoffs. So a true spoiler against a team in a must-win situation, the square's going to say, bet on the team in the must-win situation. They have more to play for. The sharp says quite the opposite. And again, we discussed that in a lot more detail in articles and other videos that they have. Continuing with sports myths from offshoreinsiders.com. Another one of those, bet on the team with better guard play in the NCAA tournament. We knew this was false, and we saw a study that was done more so about the outright upsets. Originally it was also on ESPN Insider. It's now a guy that does bracket science. We'll give a shout out to his website, Bracket Science, but he breaks it down that the guard-oriented thing is a complete myth when it comes to the NCAA tournament. As we've told you, there are a lot more good guards out there. Teams that get eliminated in the first round are usually guard-oriented. Teams that don't make the NCAA tournament are guard-oriented. The teams that advance deep not only have the good guards, they've got the great front court scoring. Spend the $40 or whatever it is the guy at Bracket Science charges. Very good for handicappers and really maybe even sports fans alike. Another one of those humongous myths. People say, I just don't want to bet on those inconsistent teams. I can't really get a feel for them. False. The most profitable teams to the sharp player are what we call predictably unpredictable teams or consistently inconsistent teams. That is, they generally follow up a great game with a bad game with a great effort, and add to that, it is always good to bet on the underdog in those games. So let's say one team is a big favorite and they're coming off of playing quite well. The other team's a big underdog and they're coming off the game poorly, but both teams are really fit into that consistently inconsistent, the so-called Jekyll and Hyde teams. In a situation like that, more times than not, we're going to go with the underdog. Also, another humongous mistake. It's made in the NCAA tournament. It's made in the bowl games. Handicapping neutral games as if they're a road game. As we said, and again, all these we discuss in more detail in other articles and videos, a neutral game is just that. It's not a home game, and it's not a road game. The odds makers flat out know, and I've had odds makers tell me this, they know that in bowl games or in the NCAA tournament, in the rare case where you're going to get neutral games like late in the season, well, not just that, the conference tournaments as well, square players overplay road statistics in neutral games. Let me say it again. A neutral game is no more a road game than it is a home game. Handicap pitching and defense, first and foremost in baseball. That is yet another big-time myth. We saw, this is one of those videos that you could play back in 2036. It'll probably be true. We're recording it in 2012. After last year, the Philadelphia Phillies, with one of the great pitching staffs of all time, were beaten in the first round by the St. Louis Cardinals, who had a much better offense. There are so many more examples, the Braves, etc. Teams that are good hitting teams are the ones we'll normally bet on. But more importantly, and again, we've discussed it in more detail elsewhere, but pitching is a lot more of something to get a tough handle on. Sometimes bad pitchers get hot. For the most part, good offenses come from teams with good offensive players. Good pitching means quite often riding the hot pitcher. So again, offense, the better team. Pitching, sometimes the hotter one is where the better value is. Being the more rested thing is a good thing. That is another sports betting myth. Quite the contrary. Again, our golden rule. Rest benefits the teams that need it the most. When a team is playing poorly, they need a time off to make adjustments. When a team is overachieving, that's when playing back-to-back nights in the NBA, even 4 games in 5 nights, isn't that bad of a thing. Same thing with bye weeks in football. Don't assume that rest is always a good thing. I know some square guys in the NBA, and as we record this again, it's in that strike shortened season or the lockout shortened season where it's condensed, but especially in a quote-unquote normal NBA season, I know guys that will blindly bet against teams playing their 5th game in 7 nights, their 3rd game in 4 nights on the road against a rested home team. Big mistake. A team's in a groove, they don't want any time off. A team's playing poorly, that's when they need to make adjustments. Well, again, for the best winning plays each and every day, it's at offshoreinsiders.com.